larger child care and education system and the child care subsidy program in specific. And I would say this is a much broader focus than the wonderful work we're hearing at the division, because what we're trying to understand is what's happening for all children and families. And it's interesting that a price study is is a very effective way to get in and find out what's actually happening. So what we are we've put it into 4 sections. We're going to start with the whole system and just try and get the basics of that, because we're going to use the concepts then in explaining the market price study findings. And then we'll look also at what it means that the subsidy program operates within a much broader market system. And then we'll finally get to exactly what we found in the study and end with considerations that dovetail a lot with the conversations that have already been going on, but that are specific to rate setting and to the payment system. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
So I'm going to take a few moments to talk about just provide some background on the market system. So as we've talked about and has come up today, the child care is predominantly carried by parents, and parents carry nearly the full burden. So in this image, you can see about 72% is by parents and families, and 80% of the federal and state tax investments is via tax credits. So this works out to about 20% representing investments in programs such as Head Start, and about 10% of non-parental care and children in non-parental care receiving subsidy payment. So it's a fairly small portion. And so then we're going to make sure we're all on the same page of talking about the important and differences between provider price versus the cost of providing care. The price is really speaking about the amount charged to parents for care. So when a parent goes out and seeks care for a child, what they're facing in terms of what the provider is posting for their charges. And this is described by a market price study. Then there's also different but important, the cost of care. So this is the amount the provider expends to deliver the service, and the reality is many providers don't know their true cost, and this is described by a cost study. So, got fancy transition. So just a little bit more. Oh, I think, did it skip one?
Did I skip a
There was something about, just a little more about provider costs. Oh, it's not in there anymore. That's okay. So pretend there's a slide up there about price. We know that providers' revenue are, like I said, determined largely by parents. And these prices are really affected by what the market can bear. And a lot of this is that providers set their prices based on concern for the well-being of families. So they notice the stress that families are under in trying to reach those costs, and so they adjust their rates. Prices are also higher, as we know, within larger population and higher income communities. And therefore, centers and large-based home providers are working with trying to have prices high enough so that they can meet payroll for for the people that they are employing. And then small-based providers often have a revenue, but they end up not making any wage. And so it may not even be equivalent to minimum wage when they come down and look at all the different costs. So then provider costs, personnel, as we've talked about, makes up 80% of those costs. It's incredibly labor intensive. There's not really a way for technology to provide cost efficiencies. you need the personnel and you need the people, especially for infants and toddlers. And this personnel cost is really hard to reduce. So we know that wages are low. This has come up already today, and probably comes up quite a bit in this committee. And we know that a large proportion do have bachelor's degrees, so there's that discrepancy between credentials and wage. And there is a cost study underway. And so we know just a little bit more. This is a similar information from the last slide, but Oregon providers in this early learning childcare system is in the bottom 1% of industries. Childcare providers make very little, and so this is with the numbers up here are compared to kindergarten teachers or thinking about the K-12 school system. The wages are not commensurate with education and skill, which we saw in an earlier presentation as well. And so this is leading to low wages associated with high turnover. So another way to think about the turnover issues, it's about 1 in 5 providers is leaving every year versus in K-12 where it's about 1 in 12. And then finally, we want to address some system inequities on the final one there. So what happens is that many families are being priced out of the system. So about 2/3 of Oregon families have both parents employed or a single parent employed, and parents find a way to not purchase care. So they're going outside the market care and going to relative and friend care or no non-parental care. And so this leaves about 30% of Oregon's children in some kind of market care. Providers really struggle to be sustainable with this, and this is especially true in rural communities where there's lower population and low income. And so at this point, the system is really struggling to meet the needs of children and families and providers. So I had to check with Bobbie, is this right? And it is. There are slots available only for 16% of Oregon's children. And so when you think about that, and you think about the concerns around quality, there's also concern around the quality of the care that is available.
Can I stop and ask a question here? So I'm trying to remember, I think you said, Bobbie, before that 30% of kids were in unregulated care, kith and kin, whatever. There were 120,000 kids that Miriam said were in regulated care. There's 30% in market care, and remind me what market care is?
Oh, organized care centers, homes that are in the market that are
licensed,
charging price. They're not all regulated, but because if they care for under 3 children, the R&Rs still know about them, but the vast majority of them are regulated.
But that's not the same 30% of kids in unregulated, but they would overlap some, right?
But they're predominantly regulated. And then 40% are not. Now, this is 0 to 12. It would vary if you 3 to 5-year-olds, almost half of them are in market care. So it's the babies and the older children. So when you look at it together is where you get that. Does that help? So now we're going to talk about the subsidy program. So what we did here was create 2 columns so you can understand how the subsidy program fits in. So childcare industry is the 17th largest of all of Oregon's industries, and we just said it was, so it's really the top on the number of industries, size of it, but it's 4th from the bottom in wages. So those 2 kind of go together to give you a picture. It's an industry with this very strong characteristic that it's big, but it pays very low wages. And its revenues are over 1.3 billion, and there's about 170,000 slots of market care. So there's some other care in there that I'm not sure why we're a little bit different than the 120. But I'm sure we could see that one's counting one. They might be some of the classifications of types of programs that get counted. But the important thing is to see the subsidy program in the context of that. So we have a budget of approximately $79 million in the subsidy program. Less than 6% of the market revenue is connected to is associated with the subsidy program. And we partially fund, and it's important to remember that we don't fund the slot fully. The parent pays a copay. So we partially fund about 15,000 slots. 62% of those slots are in market care. So then that's why it's less than, because the subsidy allows us to pay any legally operating providers. So it used to be half, but it's now down to a smaller percentage of our that our children were with family, friends, and neighbors who were paid by the subsidy program, but we've definitely seen a trend going to parents selecting more market care. And this is 14 to 16, it was 62%.
Can I ask another question? I'm still a little confused about market care.
Okay.
So the ones that are not in market care are kith and kin?
Yes.
Family, friend, and neighbor?
Relatives.
Even if they're paid or no?
If it's in the subsidy program, it's paid.
Okay.
If it's outside the subsidy program, the National Survey of Early Care and Education would show it's not paid predominantly.
But the 38% that are not in market care, those are all kith and kin?
They're either a relative or they are a friend who has been gotten listed to receive money from DHS. So they've been through.
Okay.
Making sense?
Yeah, it's
No,
an
stick
interesting,
with me.
the term is, I don't understand the term that well. I don't understand whether market care is the same as regulated care, meaning licensed, and the rest are kith and kin, because some of the kith and kin are grandparents doing out of the love of their heart, and some are being paid. So that's why the term market care is a new one for me, and I don't quite understand it.
It's a differentiation of whether they're paid or not paid. And
but some of the 38%
it's so closely aligned that maybe I should just be using the term regulated care. It's just that there's a few people who get paid who are not regulated. They're still legal, but they're not regulated. So,
but they're part of the 38%, right? Or no?
No.
As I'm trying to figure out, the people that get paid through our subsidy program, who are the unregulated family, friends, and neighbor, do they fall in the non-market care or the market care?
Oh, non-market. They're in the 38%.
So it's kind of regulated, unregulated.
Yes.
Or
and I'm sorry I use this term. The problem with
I just need to
research is we try to be very precise and not mislead you, but in the process we can confuse you.
Okay.
It's just,
Absolutely.
So my apologies.
Representative Malmstrom, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Lively. Despite all this unmet need, I keep thinking, what about all these families out there that currently are not being counted because mom and dad work alternate schedules, that if they had access to care or more affordable care, they would be into this market too? And
that's
do you
the
have
40%?
Is that what
the 40% of families we're talking about.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about, that's the 40%, okay.
That 40% who are not using parental care, we showed that 2/3 of children have parents employed, either two parents employed or a single employed parents, 2/3 of the children.
Okay, so that's how you're counting it, is by they're employed and they're not using the care.
Well, that was an attempt to get at what is the real need.
Right.
And so what we did was we went into census data and looked at employment status of the parents and counted how many children in Oregon have both parents employed or a single parent employed.